Hi everyone, I'm Susan Birch and welcome to another Health Detector podcast. Today, I'm really pleased to introduce you to Dr. Glenn Livingston. He's the author of the book Never Binge Again and is a psychologist. So he's got some interesting and different perspective to take on this whole eating food dynamic. So it's really exciting to have you here today, Glenn.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here. I've been looking forward to this, Susan. Thank you for having me.
We did try a few weeks ago, but the weather was so bad, the internet connection wasn't too good for us, was it? Glenn, would you start just by, you've got an interesting background, you've worked for food industry, you've been overweight yourself. Would you just talk a little bit about your background and what drove you to write this book? And then we'll get into the details.
Okay. Well, I never set out to be an eating disorders psychologist. I had an eating disorder, so I didn't think I should be working with people that had them. If you had passed by the Woodbury Country Deli in Syosset, New York, and they were out of pizza or Pop-Tarts, it's probably because I got there before you. So I'm 6'4". I'm modestly muscular, just genetically. And when I was a kid, I figured out that if I worked out for a couple hours a day, I could eat anything I wanted to. And I thought it was great. It was like a superpower. It was like Doug Glenn says, like a superpower. And it didn't bother me until I was a little older and in graduate school and commuting a couple hours each way to go to see patients and take classes. And then we were running a business. I was married early. And so I just didn't have time, but the food had a hold of me itself. And being a psychologist was always most important to me. I was a child and family psychologist, and that was most important to me. I come from a family of 17 therapists, and when something would break in the household, everybody runs over to ask it how it feels, and nobody knows how to fix it. So I was always a can you love yourself more kind of person. And so I figured the problem I had with food must be in my heart. It's not really in my stomach. It must be in my heart. I've got a hole in my heart, and if I could fill that hole in my heart, then I would stop having to fill the hole in my stomach. And I went to all the best psychologists and psychiatrists, and I went to Overeaters Anonymous. I did all kinds of spiritual pursuits. I took medication for a while, and I learned a lot. I don't regret the journey. I became more compassionate towards myself. I feel like I have a very rich inner life because of that journey. But on a practical basis, what would happen I would get a little thinner and a lot fatter and a little thinner and a lot fatter and a little thinner and a lot fatter. And the food obsession just kept on running. It's like it had a life of its own. And I'd be sitting with a suicidal patient wondering when I could get the next pizza. I'd be talking to a couple who just discovered an affair and, thinking about how do I get to the deli? How can I squeeze in time to get to the deli? And it really bothered me because I wanted to be the kind of psychologist that was very present with people and could lend them his soul. The psychology is not really an intellectual endeavor. I mean, it is, but you need to get people to love and trust you enough to think new thoughts and leave their comfort zone. Yeah. So all these years, this was decades that I was trying to love myself then, and it just wasn't working. I was also pursuing a dual career because my ex-wife traveled. I was married for 28 years to a woman that traveled for business. And I had a lot of time on my hands. And so I also consulted for industry. I did consulting for big food companies, for big pharma companies. I was really on the wrong side of the war, kind of helping to sell sugar and starch and fat and excitotoxins and things that I feel very guilty about later in my life. But I did it. I'm trying to make up for it now. And along the way, I figured out as I was seeing what was going on in these companies that there are really very powerful forces at work that had nothing to do with our personal psychology. Like there are chemicals that they engineer into some of these food-like substances that we're eating from bags and boxes and containers that actually turn off our ability to know when we're full. They're spending millions, if not billions of dollars to fake out our survival drives, those evolutionary buttons that are designed to find nutrition and calories and good stuff. They've learned how to press those buttons and get us to buy, potato chips and chocolate bars and all types of things instead. And I remember, for example, there was an executive at a major food bar manufacturer who, as he was leaving the company, told me that he was a little bit ashamed that the most profitable thing they ever did was to take the vitamins out of the bar and put the money into the packaging instead. So they made these multicolored, diverse, shiny packages, which in nature, if you see a vibrant diversity of colors, you're very attracted to that because it represents a diversity of micronutrients. That's why they say, eat the rainbow. You have a salad with green lettuce and blueberries and red tomatoes and yellow carrots. And green lettuce. You're acquiring a diversity of micronutrients. It's got a real survival value. Your brain is wired to say that's where the good stuff is. But in this case, they were faking us out. And this goes on all across the food industry. They've also figured out that what people want is not necessarily to eat healthy, but to have plausible deniability. Like, these potato chips are made with avocado oil. So forget the fact that they're, 42 million calories per serving, that, fried anything is carcinogenic. Forget all that. These are made with avocado oil, so therefore they're good for you. And the reason that's kind of important in introducing my background is that it was part of the insight that led me to recognize that there wasn't really anything wrong with me psychologically that could be fixed to fix the eating problem. And I think in our culture, we're really led to believe that overeating is driven by conflicted emotions, unpleasant emotions that we can't tolerate. There is a relationship, but it's not what people think. But this was a very powerful force.
Yeah, and that you're weak and that you lack motivation and you lack willpower and
Well, yeah. So our culture will also tell you that there's something wrong with you. You don't have enough willpower, but they don't recognize that the advice given by the culture obliterates your willpower. So willpower is the ability to make good decisions. And it's not so much a genetic ability as a certain amount of gas in the tank we wake up with each day. And you can only make so many good decisions over the course of the day. Every time you're weighing, should I do this or should I do that? You're burning a little bit more of your brain glucose, and it's a physiological quantity, and we don't seem to have an infinite amount of it. And so when you're told things like eat well 90% of the time and indulge yourself 10% of the time, which is good advice in theory, it's actually very bad practical advice because you don't know which is the 10% and which is the 90%. So like, let's say you're saying, well, eat chocolate 10% of the time and abstain from it 90% of the time. How do you know every time you're in front of a chocolate bar at Starbucks, whether this is one of the times you should indulge or abstain? So you're always having to engage those decisions, wear down your willpower, wear down your willpower, wear down your willpower, as opposed to saying, I'm not going to have chocolate during the week. I'll have it on the weekends. So I made all my chocolate decisions during the week. Now I don't have to use my willpower to do that. So that's kind of a side point, but yeah. So I saw what was going on in the advertising industry and the food industry, and I said, there's not something wrong with me. I don't have a psychological disease. I don't have a physical disease that's causing me to do this. I've got a healthy appetite that's been corrupted by industry. That's what's going on. This is a very strong biological urge, and there should be a way that I can constrain it and direct it, because in our civilization, we're taught to constrain and direct our biological urges. You can't just drop trow and pee whenever you have to pee, right? Yeah. Like if I really had to go right now, I would say tell my bladder, I'm sorry, but I'm talking to Susan. I'll get to you. I'll get to you when the time is right. Yeah. There's an attractive person on the street. You can't just run up to them and kiss them. there are appropriate ways to go about that. And I was always very shy, so I run the other way anyway. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm.
These are biologically driven urges, as is the desire for a chocolate bar or a hamburger or a donut or whatever else you're struggling to stop overeating. And why can't you take control of it? Figure out a system for recognizing when the reptilian brain is active. And it is the reptilian brain that seems to be responsible for overeating. It's like this emergency response system gone awry. It's because we used to live in an environment of feast and famine. And so when there were calories and nutrition available, we had to get as many as we could. And we don't live in that environment anymore. We live in a very abundant environment for most of us for calories and nutrition. Food is constantly available. We could all walk around with a feed bag on 24 hours a day if we wanted to, right? So they're not going to find your bones by the refrigerator tomorrow morning, most likely, if you live in the first world, right? So I started to think differently, like I had to shift the paradigm, and then that I wasn't really going to be so much of a love myself thin solution. It was going to be more like being the alpha wolf of my own brain. And when an alpha wolf is challenged for leadership, it doesn't go, oh my goodness, somebody needs a hug. It snarls and it growls, it asserts its superiority, and it says, get back in line or I'll kill you, right? That's what an alpha wolf does. The last thing that really pushed me over the edge with this philosophy was this very large study that I did in the late 90s and early 2000s while clicks were cheap on the internet. And I figured I was getting paid all this money to do studies for these big corporations. I was an advertising research consultant. I might as well set one up for myself. So I intercepted people when they were searching for solutions to stress management, stress relief, that kind of thing. And I asked them what they were stressed about. And I asked them what kinds of foods that they have trouble stopping eating when they felt stressed. And I found three interesting things. There were 40,000 people that took this survey over several years, by the way. One of them was that when people were stressed at work, they tended to go for salty, crunchy things like chips and potato chips and pretzels. When they were stressed at home, they tended to go for soft, chewy carbohydrates like pizza or pasta or bagels or bread. And when they were stressed by feeling lonely or brokenhearted or a little depressed, they tended to go for chocolate. And so this was a real turning point for me. I said, okay, that's me. Chocolate is my thing. I always start with chocolate, and then I would go to other things. And I called my mom. Like, remember, I was not going to teach this. This was something I was just trying to figure out for myself. I called my mom and I said, Mom, you're not only my mom, you're a therapist, and you struggle with chocolate also. And I found this really interesting thing. People who struggle with chocolate, they tend to be lonely or a little depressed or brokenhearted. And, I'm not really happy in the marriage. And so that kind of describes me. But how did this whole thing get set up? This was my last ditch effort to kind of figure out the emotional part of it. And she said, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. And I said, Mom, it's okay. Whatever it is, it was 40 years ago. This is in my early 40s that I called her. It's 40 years ago. And I forgive you. I love you. I just want to figure this out. She says, honey, I'm so sorry. But when you were 1 year old in 1965, your father, my husband, he was a captain in the army. And they were talking about sending him to Vietnam. And I was terrified. We were trying to have your sister. And I thought, I'm going to have 2 small kids and I'll be an army widow. And it's going to be awful. At the same time, my father, your grandfather, had just gotten out of prison, and I hadn't known where he was for 2 years. And I didn't know he was guilty, and he was. And I had idolized this man, and my whole world fell apart when he disappeared. And so half the time, honey, while you would come running to me for a hug or love or some healthy food, I just didn't have the wherewithal to give it to you. So I kept a big bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup in a refrigerator on the floor, and I'd say, go get your Bosco. And you go running over or crawling over to the Bosco. and you take it out of the refrigerator and you'd open up the cap and you'd suck on the bottle and you go into a chocolate sugar coma. And I think that's where it comes from. I think that's where it comes from. And I was stunned. And if this were a movie, at that point, Mom and I would have a big hug and a big cry. And I would never struggle with chocolate again. If the emotional conflict was all that was driving it, that would have been the resolution. That would have been the ultimate catharsis, or at least the very beginning of the end.
Yeah.
And, Mom and I would forgive each other. And that would be it. I would never have trouble again. Well, I mean, it was a good conversation to have. I forgave my mom. I could certainly forgive myself more. I liked myself better after that. But my chocolate eating got worse, not better, but worse. And the reason is that there was this little voice in my head. It was a voice of justification. And it went something like this. You know what, Glenn, you're right. Our mama didn't love us enough, and she left a great big chocolate-sized hole in your heart. And until you can find the love of your life and get out of this marriage, you're going to have to go right on eating chocolate. Yippee, let's go get more right now. And so at that point, everything started turning, everything flipped. And I said, no, wait a minute. So the part of the brain that responds to food addiction is the reptilian brain, and the reptilian brain doesn't know love. It knows eat, mate, or kill. Like the love is in the higher brain that says before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact does it have on the people you love in your tribe? So the part of your brain that's trouble doesn't know love at all. You're not going to love this thing back to health. Secondly, it doesn't seem like the emotional insight is really doing any good. It's almost like knowing what burned your house down, knowing who started the fire. That doesn't really help you. You have to fix the house still, right? And it seems like you should be able to be an alpha wolf, just like you are with your bladder or your testicles or other biological urges. And this voice of justification seems to be your enemy. It seems like when the reptilian brain is active, there's this voice of justification that says, you're at Starbucks, you worked out hard enough this morning. It doesn't matter that you made a rule that says you are never going to have chocolate on a weekday. It's not going to hurt. It'll just be a couple of bites anyway, and you can start your silly diet tomorrow. It'll be just as easy. I'm going to say, wait a minute. Now, Susan, this is a little embarrassing because I'm a sophisticated psychologist with a lot of credentials and a lot of, public appearances and everything. But what I did was a little crazy, and I was not going to teach this. I decided to call my reptilian brain my inner pig. So at that moment at Starbucks, I'd say, wait a minute, that's not me. That's my pig. And on a Wednesday, chocolate is pig slop. I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. And it sounds ridiculous and crude, but it would wake me up at the moment of impulse and give me some extra microseconds to decide what to do. And I wish I could say it was an immediate miracle and everything was all better right away, but it wasn't. What was a miracle is the confusion went away. What was a miracle is that sometimes I made the right decision. Sometimes I remembered why I made the rule in the first place. And as I started to make the right decision, I also started to develop a methodology for kind of slowing down and getting out of the reptilian brain. Like I learned that breathing is very important. So there's this feast and famine response that's saying just hand over the chocolate and nobody gets hurt. Well, if you breathe in for a count of 7 and out for a count of 11, you're activating your parasympathetic nervous system. That's the nervous system that says nothing is urgent right now. There's no emergency. This is a time to rest and digest. And the reason that breathing out for longer than you breathe in activates that is if you were breathing out for longer than you were breathing in while you were being chased by a hungry bear and there really was an emergency, you'd have to immediately stop and go, right? Because you'd be running as fast as you could. So I learned that things like that would naturally calm me down would also calm down the reptilian brain and make me feel like there was an emergency, and I would more frequently make the right decision.
Can I just ask, sorry, I don't want to interrupt your flow, but how do you recognize when you're in the reptilian brain compared with when you're in your higher brain?
Well, I mean, you can't 100% know that, but we can play a game where we define your pig. We can define your destructive thoughts as any thought, feeling, or impulse that suggests that you're going to break your rule ever between now and the time that you die, right? So then if I sat down and I thought to myself, what's the simplest thing I could do that would make a difference in my life in terms of my binging? And I decided not having chocolate during the week was the simplest thing I could do. Like I wasn't going to starve myself. Maybe I wouldn't lose weight, but damn it, I'm not going to have chocolate during the week. And when I really thought that through and I decided to commit to that, immediately I heard all these voices in my head. And I'm not schizophrenic, so I'm just saying I consciously chose to separate from the destructive thoughts, because we can organize our thoughts any way we want to. And I can say that any thought that suggests that I'm going to stay with this rule is me. And any thought that suggests I'm going to break that rule, that's not me, that's my pig. And so we know that it's probably active, because when we were of sound mind and body and we thought through how we wanted to behave, we came up with this codified behavior, or a rule that suggests exactly how we're going to behave at the moment of temptation. And so we know that if we're thinking about doing otherwise, that's my reptilian brain. So that's how we do that. You also know, because your heart rate goes up a little bit and you're breathing fast, and if you are eating, you're not really mindful and present while you're eating. You're probably eating a little faster. You don't get the full experience. You don't let it nourish you. There are a lot of other clues, but for the purpose of recovering, the best thing that we found is to define a very clear black and white rule that draws a very clear line, so that when there's something inside of you that wants you to cross that line. That's the best way to alert you to the problem.
Right. And because you talk about using rules rather than guidelines.
Well,
and I can see why that would be useful, So for example, I'm working away and you're sort of thinking, and you get up and you wander around and you go to the fridge and you open the fridge and there's some chocolate, and you just sort of absent-mindedly eat a bit of chocolate.
mm-hmm.
But if I had a rule, I'm not going to eat chocolate during the week,
Mm-hmm.
then that would stop me from choosing the chocolate to eat, and maybe make me even aware that why am I eating because I'm hungry? Am I eating because I'm trying to distract myself?
Gives you pause.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we tell people to consider every rule to be preceded by the words consciously and purposefully. So if I say I'll never eat chocolate during the week again, what I really mean is that I'll never consciously and purposely eat chocolate during the week. One time I was at a Mexican restaurant, and I discovered after the fact that there was some chocolate in one of the dishes, but I didn't do that consciously and purposely. So I didn't tell myself that I broke the rule. And also there is a learning process where if you do absentmindedly grab chocolate from the refrigerator and then you suddenly have a rule, it does bring it into higher valence, but it sometimes takes a little while before you really snaps in and that you're doing something wrong when you do that. And not wrong in the sense that it's going to keep you out of heaven, or that you have to judge yourself or hate yourself about it, but you're doing something unintended that you don't want to do. Just it really clarifies things for you. Yeah. So we have people do that. And then when they're aware that the reptilian brain has awakened, they take another 7-Eleven breath and say, okay, I call mine a pig. You can call it your food monster or your junkyard dog. It's just not a cute pet. It's not something you want to love back to health. This is something you want to assert superiority over. So I'll say, okay, Mr. Pig, why do you want me to eat this now? Why should I give up on my goals and my dreams and all of my best intentions and change my mind and go ahead and eat this on a Wednesday? And then the pig will say, you worked out hard enough and you could start your silly diet tomorrow, right? It'll be just as easy. Then you write that down. Do this in writing. It's better to carry around a smartphone or a piece of paper, because writing is an upper brain activity and binging is lower brain activity. Also, there are limitations of short-term memory that will prevent you from seeing your pig's whole argument. And your pig likes to hide behind brevity and ambiguity. And so if you can really out the pig and find out exactly what it's saying, there'll be more opportunities to prove it wrong. So in this case,
Sorry,
sorry.
I was just going to say, so you're writing down the pig's arguments as to why you should be eating this chocolate.
Yes, Glenn, one bite's not going to hurt. You worked out hard enough, you're not going to gain any weight, and you could start your silly diet tomorrow. It'll be just as easy.
Yeah.
Yippee, go give up on your goals and dreams and let's go get some right now. Yippee.
Yeah.
Right? That's what the pig says. Once you have that in writing, take another 7-Eleven breath, because there is an excitatory impact on the lower brain of having been listened to. So you want to calm down again, and then ask yourself, how is the pig wrong? What is the pig saying that's wrong? For instance, when it says it'll be just as easy to start your diet tomorrow, it seems like that, but the truth is the principle of neuroplasticity says the way the brain works, when something fires together, it wires together. So if you have a craving, you have a thought and a craving, and then you say, well, just as easy to start tomorrow, and then you have the chocolate, you've reinforced the craving and that thought, and you're going to be more likely to have it tomorrow, not less, or certainly not the same. So you've actually dug a deeper hole for yourself. It's going to be harder to start tomorrow, not easier to start tomorrow. So you can disempower those seemingly logical justifications. It's always like a half truth and a bigger lie. It really seems true, but it's not. And when you just pause and take a moment to examine it, you can figure that out. And then you calm down again, you take another 7-Eleven breath, and you ask yourself, well, why would I be a happier, better person if I stayed with my rule now as opposed to breaking it? And I might think, well, because I'll remain a tall, thin man and I'll be able to be a leader in the world, or I feel confident in my body, or I'll be close to, at least as my girlfriend, or I'll have more energy or presence of mind later. It's important to stop and think about those things, because in the absence of that, it seems like you're depriving yourself. But the truth is that if you did go ahead and break your rule, you'd be depriving yourself of the confidence that you're in control of your own eating, you'd be depriving yourself of the clarity of mind, of the confidence in your body and your health, and you're being free of cardiovascular. You'd be depriving yourself a lot of different things. It's important to start amassing a list of all the things you're depriving yourself by continuing to overeat, because at the moment of impulse, your pig is going to say, everybody else is doing it, you're going to feel too deprived.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Right?
Yep.
Right.
You deserve this. Yeah. You're going to feel deprived. Yep, absolutely.
So that's the essence of it. And we can use guidelines also for things that are not as serious, for things you just kind of want to remember, but you don't feel are getting you into trouble with food. Like, for example, I like to remember to buy organic when it's reasonably possible to do so.
Right.
I don't specifically define what reasonably possible means, because I'm not out there binging on conventional lettuce, right? But if the organic lettuce is not too much more expensive, I'll buy the organic lettuce. So I have a guideline that says I buy organic when it's reasonably possible to do that. It's not really an anti-binging guideline. It's really just a health guideline. I have a rule that says I don't eat chocolate on the week. Actually, no, it says I don't eat chocolate at all. I have a rule that says that because I want to enforce, I want to be able to recognize immediately any thought that suggests that I should do otherwise. And I can get in a lot of trouble if I'm eating chocolate, like a lot of trouble. So,
how does this help your, we started by talking about that empty feeling inside, the lack of self-love, the lack of, which we all feel like drives a lot of this, right? We have that sense, and we've been told that, you were talking about eat yourself, you have to love yourself thin. So that's something that we've all grown up with and believed. How does setting this rule, dealing with that reptilian brain, using your alpha wolf, how does that help with the higher brain feeling of improving that self-esteem and that self-love?
Well, first of all, when you master a new discipline, self-esteem goes up, not down, right? So if I was out of control with chocolate my whole life and suddenly I'm able to control chocolate, I'm feeling better of myself, just vis-a-vis having done that. Secondly, this technique is not really designed to solve the self-esteem problem. It's designed to sever the link between the self-esteem problem and overeating so that the self-esteem problem doesn't have the same effect. Now, you'll find that when you feel in more control and you feel better about yourself because of that, that you're a little braver about looking at what the emotions were in the first place, that you're not running to the food, so you're sitting with the feelings a little longer. And then if you have a therapist or you do journaling or any other method that traditionally people use to overcome their self-esteem problems, you are more likely to be able to take a hard look at that. It's kind of like building a really good fireplace in front of a roaring fire. You don't put out the fire, but you made it safe. And now you can sit and look at it and figure out, do you want to damp it down? Do you want to use the energy of this fire for some other reason? I mean, a fire in the living room is really an asset, not a liability, if it's well contained in a fireplace. People gather around and they hug and they cry and they make memories, right? They tell stories and they laugh. It's only when the fire can get out. So this is a fix the fireplace method. It's not a put out the fire kind of method. Yeah. But as a practical matter, it actually works to make the fire better because it gives you the control and the safety to look at it. There's a couple of other things while we're talking about it, about emotional eating, that are really critical. If you would allow me to go into that, or did you want to go some?
Yeah, no.
Okay. Most people think, when they think of emotions and overeating, they think of a one-way unitary relationship. Like, here come the emotions, there's the food, yum, 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 right?
Yeah.
It doesn't really work entirely like that. So here are the emotions, but then there's this voice of justification in the middle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you disempower that voice of justification, you're changing this grease chute into something that doesn't work as easily, right? So that's the fireplace. But then, see, people will say that they're overeating to comfort themselves or, quote, numb out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I often joke with them, when you go to the dentist, does the dentist ever say, I'm really sorry, but I'm out of Novocaine today. Is it okay if I inject you with some chocolate? Right. And that's kind of a funny thing, because chocolate doesn't have the same function as Novocaine. There's something else that chocolate does. Chocolate is kind of like a drug. It gets you a little bit high. It's a supersized stimulus. We didn't have chocolate bars on the savannah. We didn't have, potato chips and pretzels and pasta and a lot of the other things that we overeat on the savannah either. In our natural evolution, these foods would have been perceived as supersized sources of pleasure. They're concentrated sources of pleasure that we're not really equipped to deal with. And they induce a supersized pleasure response. And they induce addiction also, because we're like, oh my God, where did we find that? And another word for that is a drug, right? Like, these things are perfectly legal. And I encourage people, if they think that they can, to learn how to moderate it or regulate it rather than give it up entirely. But some people have to give things up entirely. I was like that with chocolate. I'm not like that with flour. I can plan out a vegan pizza every couple of months and I'll do okay with it. I usually wish I didn't have it after I had it, but I don't go off the deep end and have 10 pizzas after that.
Yeah.
So we're not just comforting ourselves, we're actually getting high with food. And changing what you tell yourself about that is important, because most people don't want to think about themselves as drug addicts. And if you say, I'm comforting myself, then your pig is just going to start to cry and say, I need comfort and I'm so lonely, and you're prone to doing it more if you say that. But if you say, I'm getting high with food, it's different. Also, it's not a one-way relationship. It turns out that eating that chocolate bar after you have the emotion reinforces the emotions. How do we know this? Well, for example, a lot of people tell me that they're too anxious to go to sleep without overeating. And their biggest problem is nighttime overeating because of that. And I say, well, do you know that when you feel anxious, that there's a physiological component of that? your heart rate goes up a little bit. So does your galvanic skin response and your perspiration, your respiration, and your blood pressure actually goes up a little bit. And there are all sorts of animal studies where we reward the animal for those heightened physiological states. For example, we took a group of baboons. I don't know if this is ethical or not, but they did it, and they gave them a sugar reward every time the baboons had higher blood pressure. And don't you know, those baboons learned to produce higher blood pressure overall. If you measured the blood pressure independent of the sugar reward later on, that group of baboons who got the sugar rewards for blood pressure had higher blood pressure. So it could be that what you're doing is rewarding the anxiety with sugar or flour or cheese or whatever it is that you're binging on. You could be rewarding that and reinforcing and increasing the very response you're trying to reduce. And it might be that if you just let it extinguish, it would be uncomfortable for a couple of nights, but then it would start to go away. So there's this multifaceted relationship. It's just not a one-way thing. The upshot of that is at some point, everybody has to tell their inner pig that they're willing to deal with any level of emotional discomfort in order to stick to their rules. The rules have to become sacred. They have to become paramount. They have to become something that you really trust yourself to have determined for your own best interest. It's not that you can't change them, but you don't change them impulsively. It's kind of like, when my niece was 2 years old, little Sarah, I told her, Sarah, you can't ever, 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 ever cross the street without holding my hand. Never, ever, 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 ever. But of course I know when she's older, we're going to teach her how to cross the street without holding my hand.
Yeah.
Well, did I lie to her? Yes. Would it have been okay for me to tell her, when you're a big girl, you're going to cross the street when you're older? Not really, because I don't want her having those images in her head. They're too dangerous. She doesn't have the impulse control at 2 years old to do that. Yeah. It's kind of, so I present it to her as if it's set in stone, even though I'm lying. It's kind of the same way with our pigs. We present the rules to the pig as if it's set in stone, because the pig is too immature to think, well, maybe someday you're going to have it. It'll keep saying, is it now? Can we do it now? How about now? How about now? How about now? And you'll be bothered with that food obsession all the time. Whereas if you come up with a set of rules and you consider them to be sacred and you present them to your pig as if they're set in stone, the food obsession goes away, similar to how a prisoner that's given a life sentence and really believes it eventually starts to give up hope, because hope is a waste of energy in that situation. Our brains are set up to be very efficient and not to crave things that we're never going to have, or that we're never going to have outside of a certain context. So
that makes sense. Coming back to the addiction, the food addiction component, what's the difference between, being addicted and being a harmful user or being a social user? Are they different?
They are different, but it's a very interesting question. I actually wrote an article for Psychology Today about this. If you were to look up the DSM-5 criteria for binge eating, you'd find that between 2 and 4% of the population meets those criteria. It has to do with the frequency of overeating, the volume of overeating, and the feelings that are associated with it. There's a feeling of being out of control and of hating oneself. When you meet all those criteria, then there seems to be this distinct clinical entity that we can study by itself, and it responds to certain medications in certain ways. It's useful in some ways, but on the other hand, well, 2 to 4% of the population meets the criteria for binge eating. About 40% of the population is obese, and cardiovascular disease and deaths are, I think, up by 80%, and diabetes is about double over the last 10 or 20 years. And so there's obviously a very serious problem with overeating and not being able to stop yourself from eating the wrong things, which would be helpful to address. So I tell people that in part, and everybody asks me this question, so please, no judgment intended. I tell people that in a way, that's a question that your pig is asking because it wants to know, can I get away with doing a little more? Like maybe I'm not sick enough. Maybe I can actually maybe this is just good old overeating. Well, I tell people that it would be worthwhile to consider these methods if you are eating beyond your own best judgment. If you would like, you carry an extra 5 or 10 pounds or 50 or 100 or 500.
Mm.
But, even at 5 or 10 pounds, there's some indication that you can make yourself diabetic carrying an extra 5 or 10 pounds, right?
Yeah.
There's an impact on your life. People certainly feel more confident when they can control their weight like that. And people often lose, even when you simply overeat beyond your own best judgment, there's a recovery period. You're not quite yourself for the next, 6 to 24 hours, right? So do you want to wait until you develop into a full-fledged binge eater to begin to get help for that? Or since the technique that we're talking about requires no medication, no formal diagnosis, just the willingness to set a simple rule and start to play this mind game in your head, why not try to develop that mental muscle so you can get more control over those times when you've previously ate beyond your own best judgment? And yes, there's some people who only have trouble in social contexts and do really fine on their own. Yes, it's harder when you're really hungry. There's often a very natural biological urge underneath the desire to overeat. Yes, it's harder when you're tired, when you're more emotional. There are a lot of things that raise the bar, but the basic technique is the same. And I would not wait for a formal diagnosis from a mental health professional to teach yourself to do this. But please see a mental health professional if you want to. And I, even though I am one, I offer what I offer for a lot of the reasons we're talking about. I offer it as training, education, and coaching. I don't actually treat patients, because this isn't something that I do to you. Like a treatment is like, a gastric bypass, that's a treatment, or a medication, that's a treatment. This is a bunch of information that hangs together really well that can change your perception and beliefs about your ability to eat within your own best judgment and how to do that. So that's what we offer.
I think it's a fantastic kind of intervention, and we'll get into a bit more about that shortly. But I just want to come back to the obesity, the overeating. We're in a time where, we talk a lot about fat shaming, and anti-fat shaming seems, perhaps, I don't know, as a justification for overeating, not taking control of this lizard brain. But then the people I work with who are obese, who don't want to be fat shamed, but then they're actually fat shaming themselves. They still hate it, They don't really love that they are fat. They just don't want external criticism about it, I think, or I'm not sure. Can you talk about what might be behind all that?
First of all, it's really important to figure out how to love yourself before you've arrived. Wherever you are right now, you're lovable and you're worthy. And I don't mean to sound like Stuart Smalley in a Saturday Night Live skit, but you're good enough, you're smart enough, and gosh darn it, people love you, right? You have to figure out how to love yourself before you arrive. If you find that difficult, try to think about someone who is about your, height and weight, and has a similar journey they have to go on to get to be the weight the doctor wants them to be, or what would be more ideal for them. And find someone that you love and adore who's like that, and ask yourself, what do you love and adore about them? Would you ever tell them the things that you're telling yourself, like, oh, you look disgusting, this is awful, you look horrible in that, go get something much looser? Would you ever shame them for being who they are? And if you go through that exercise, you'll find it easier to accept yourself wherever you are. It's actually critical that you stop shaming yourself, because that self-castigating critical voice makes you feel too weak to resist the next binge. It's actually very difficult to keep binging if you stop yelling at yourself. So it's really critical that you learn how to love and nurture yourself before you've arrived, because it's going to be a while. And the worst thing that people do that keeps them heavy is try to lose weight too quickly. That's what I find. They always bounce back the other way. People can't stand themselves the way that they are. And so they go in these crash diets. Their body can't take it. They're not getting enough nutrition, not getting enough calories. The squeals are much louder. All the cravings and justifications are louder and stronger. They can't keep it up. And then they're, off to the races when they go. So I would say the fastest way to lose weight is slowly, probably about 1 pound a week, and learn how to love yourself before you've arrived. I think, and so I think that there is such a thing as fat shaming, and I think that people deserve love at any size. And, I'm in favor of societal movements in that direction. I also think that there are objective measures of health and energy and disease risk, and there are all sorts of diet reversible diseases that and conditions that people know about. Like, if you're walking around 100 pounds overweight, that just look around. There aren't many very old, heavy people. Like, do you know a lot of 90-year-olds that are 100? I mean, one or two, but they don't make it that long. There are some very serious and consequential, health problems that are associated with that. And there are things you can't do. It's hard to go horseback riding. It's hard to go hiking. It's hard to play with the grandkids. It's hard to be intimate with your partner. There are all kinds of things that become more difficult the heavier that you are. And so people know that. Like, no matter how much you say, I love myself and I'm lovable, and you are, right? And you really are. But you also know that this, blanket of weight that you're keeping on you is preventing you from living the life that you really could be living. And that's okay that you feel uncomfortable about that. That's different than hating yourself. That's different than shaming yourself. That's different than not participating in life until you are at your ideal weight and go to your 40th reunion, looking like you're 18 years old. That's much different than that. But, it's okay. Mental health is being in touch with reality. It's not being happy about everything. It's not being overly sad about everything. It's not totally accepting yourself, hook, line, and sinker. It's okay. There are things you don't have to accept about yourself. I'm not reading as much as I would like to. I know that my life would be better and I'd be more useful to the world if I could read more than I like. I don't like that about myself, that I'm not reading enough. Do I hate myself because I'm not reading enough? No. But it's a little discomfort, and that dissidence spurs me to adopt another rule and, work a little harder to read more so that I can achieve what I want to achieve in the world, right? But for a while, it took me a long time to find a woman that I loved after I got divorced, and I was uncomfortable that I didn't have one. I know as a psychologist, you're supposed to love yourself first and be totally confident on your own. But I also know as a psychologist, we're not really meant to be alone. We're better off. And so I didn't like that part of myself that was alone and having trouble finding someone. I was not shaming myself about it. I was going to wait until I found someone really good, because it's much better to be with someone. It's better to be alone than to be in a bad relationship, like infinitely better. But I was uncomfortable. I was not happy about it. And it would not have been mentally well for me to be happy about it, because then I wouldn't have had the drive to keep working until I found someone.
And so we can translate those concepts, which are easy to understand. We can translate those back to our food and how we're eating and how we're nourishing ourselves. And you can be healthy at a range of different sizes. I think it's when the health starts to become compromised. And as you said, all those things that you want to do, it's the energy, the no energy. You can't get up off the sofa to do anything.
Yeah.
You're not really fat shaming yourself. You are being honest and saying, actually, my health is at a point where I'm not healthy and I need to do something about this. But it doesn't make you a bad person or a terrible person.
I mean, it's not a black and white thing. Like I'm about 8 pounds from my thinnest right now, and I can feel it in yoga, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not obese by any stretch of the imagination. Nobody's going to tell me I'm unhealthily fat, but I'm about 8 pounds from my, my fighting shape place. And I can feel it in the way that I move. And so it's good to be a little uncomfortable so that I bring myself back down to where I want to
Yeah.
be. Yeah.
Mm, mm.
But it would be bad for me to think like, oh my God, I can't go outside because, someone's going to look at my belly, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
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 Or
Yeah.
not go on camera or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, that was a little diversion, but I think it's an important topic. It's very topical at the moment, and I think it's something well worth thinking about and discussing. We can get back to your book and your philosophy again. So we talked about rules versus guidelines. We talked about how willpower doesn't work. Confidence versus fear. What other elements are there that you'd like to talk about?
We could talk a little more about confidence versus fear.
Yeah.
Like in our culture, we're taught that the only way to overcome an addiction is to admit that you're powerless over it, and that you can't do it alone, that you need a sponsor, you have to go to meetings, you have to kind of subjugate yourself to the sponsor and to that group and make yourself dependent because you're not capable of controlling yourself. It's like you're a dependent little child. And first of all, I don't see the evidence for that. Like it's a very strong claim to make, that people are not capable of executing their free will and that they're powerless over temptation. And it's kind of a devil made me do it argument. And I don't see the evidence of that. I don't see those programs really having effective statistics. I see a lot more evidence in favor of, people, for lack of a better term, like just kind of growing up and taking responsibility and saying that life is not a big round alcohol party. It's not a big round food party. And, there are things I could do when I was younger that I can't do anymore. I'm going to have to take control over this. And maybe that means I have to come to terms with the fact that there are some things that I can't eat at all, maybe only in certain contexts. But I think that we want to cultivate confidence. So, in the beginning, it's okay to have an accountability buddy or to have your kids hide the junk food in a separate refrigerator or lock the refrigerator, or to not watch TV for a month or so because you don't want the stimulation of all the food commercials, or, not go out to eat for a month or so. So you're able to develop these new neurological grooves and let the old ones extinguish. But in the end, I think you really want to challenge those fears and those impulses. So like at this point, you could fill up my bathtub with chocolate and force me to go take a bath in it, and I wouldn't have any of the chocolate in the bathtub, right? Um, it used to be that I couldn't really go to the supermarket and I'd be frightened of the checkout lane because that's where my favorite chocolate bar was sitting. There came a point when I took my pig to the supermarket and I said, okay, pig, give it your best shot. What's your best reason for me to have that right now? If you can come up with a really good reason, maybe I'll do it. I didn't do it right away. But, when I was feeling strong one day and it had been, like 46 weeks and I hadn't had any, and I wasn't feeling the pangs and cravings, and I knew that I could disempower any crazy logic that it threw at me, then I went out, and that was very empowering. That made me feel a lot stronger. And so I believe in cultivating confidence rather than fear. Because either one that you cultivate tends to build on itself. When you cultivate fear, you tend to get progressively more frightened because you think that you're weaker than your reptilian brain.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, you'll give in to the reptilian brain more often, and then you'll have a worse impact, and then you'll be even more frightened of it. It gets to the point, I've had some clients who ask their children to lock them in the room, in the bedroom at night, so that they can't get out and read the refrigerator. And that's no way to live. That's no way to live. I want you to be able to seize the day and embrace your freedom and live a grand adventure rather than
Yeah. And you want to
than it.
you want to be able to go out for a meal with friends and not feel you can't go and socialize or go and have a cup of coffee somewhere because you're too scared that you're going to overindulge in these foods.
Mhm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But what you can do is create gradations of that. You can make a list of the situations that are difficult for you, and you can make a list of, you can kind of prioritize those in order, and you can tack them one by one when you're ready. And that makes people feel like they have control, without being too afraid of the risks that they're taking. And, I can't tell you exactly when it's safe for you to do that. And I can't, I can't take responsibility for knowing exactly when it is. These are risks that everybody has to take for themselves. But people will often tell me, I'm really scared that I could binge again because, I could binge if I wanted to. And I said, well, but you should be grateful that you could binge if you wanted to, because that means you have free will. And if you have the ability to choose to binge, then you also have the ability to choose not to binge, right? And I find that recovery is really about a couple of things. It's about reclaiming your free will and responsibility. It's about recognizing that our culture uses passive language and disclaims responsibility for addiction. And it's about moving. It's not about giving up any particular food substance. It's more about moving your difficult food decisions from your whims and impulses and emotions to your intellect. So think through all the difficult food situations. Ask yourself, so mine was chocolate. What role do I want chocolate to play in my life? Or if I was having trouble with pizza, what role do I want it to play in my life? Sometimes it's none. Sometimes it's like I have to give it up for a while. Sometimes it's I want no more than 2 slices twice a week. But write down specifically when you're going to do that, and and then embrace that rule and start using these techniques to deal with the very expectable counter arguments that are inevitably going to show up in your brain when you have a craving.
Mm. Mm. So it seems to me, I know we're starting to get close to time. It feels like there's so much more we could talk about. So it seems to me that writing this stuff down is going to be really key to understanding and managing and taking back control. The more you write down, and would you suggest, even, sort of reviewing it each day for a while?
Yeah. So you should review your food plan every day and read it out loud. That keeps the rules salient in your head and helps you recognize when the pig is squealing.
Yeah.
Then your pig will have a limited number of squeals, probably 3 to 6 really serious ones. And so if you start a document and we call it refutations. If you write down the squeal in full and then you refute its cancerous logic, show it where it's wrong, that's a document you can work on and make better over time. Then when you have a really good refutation, what you can do is pick one and pick a squeal. My pig says, just start tomorrow. It'll be just as easy to start the diet tomorrow. And then pick the refutation, which is if I eat when I say I'm going to start tomorrow, and starting tomorrow is just a decision to binge today. If I do that, it's going to be harder to start tomorrow. I'll have more cravings. The only moment I can eat healthy is the present. I always use the present moment to eat healthy. If I write down that refutation and I say the squeal and refutation every time before I eat, you start to associate eating with the good logic rather than the bad logic.
Mm-hmm.
And if the pig starts to try to squeal about the bad logic, the good logic immediately pops into your brain. So you can reinforce it by saying it every time before you eat anything, even good things.
Mm. And the other thing that fascinates me quite a bit is this alpha wolf. Can you we only just very briefly touched on that, but can you describe what that alpha wolf does, what the purpose of it is, how
Well,
to use it?
So at the moment of temptation, at the moment of impulse, remember the emergency response system is switched on, and you're really your organism is giving much more thrift to the reptilian brain. And so we don't always have access to the logical best part of ourself. This is why people feel like their best thinking goes out the window, because the brain perceives there to be an emergency. It throws out all of your rational cognition and your best laid plans, and it says, just hand over the chocolate and nobody gets hurt. And so because that's so primitive, you need something really primitive to wake you up. You need to be able to wake up and get back into the higher brain. And if you walk around thinking of yourself like an alpha wolf and you say, get back in line or I'll kill you, right? It sounds ridiculous, but it wakes you up. It stops the erroneous emergency response, and then you can get back into your higher self. You don't have to stay in your alpha wolf situation. Also, the truth is that this is how we're neurologically wired. The upper brain has the ability to inhibit a lot of the impulses of the lower brain. I don't think we can stop our own hearts or our own breathing indefinitely, but you could stop your breathing for a little while if you had to. The upper brain does have the ability to delay the impulse of the lower brain. The lower brain is inferior to the upper brain, which either evolved later or maybe God made us that way. But one way or the other, we are superior to this biological drive if we're awake and we know it. And so by remembering that, it's almost like what the Omega Wolf will do, or the Challenger will do, is it'll cower. It'll start, please don't kill me, please don't kill me, right? It'll whimper, and that makes it seem a lot less strong. It puts it back in its place, and it gives you the confidence to do what you need to do. This is why I say, don't think of my father was a Gestalt therapist, and in Gestalt therapy, you're trying to own these disowned parts of yourself, and you're trying to love and nurture all of your feelings. This is different. And in Gestalt therapy, the different pieces of identity that you're trying to reintegrate, they're mostly all in your upper brain, right? This is not something that is a reptilian brain response. The way that we define the pig is sociopathic. It's more like a wild boar. It's all the thoughts, feelings, impulses, and desires that suggest that you're going to break the plan that you made that you know is the most constructive way for you to eat. Therefore, it doesn't have any good thoughts. This is not something that's worthy of loving and nurturing back to health. Like, there's a common concept which says that, well, overeating was really a survival and coping mechanism when we were kids, and we needed it then, we don't need it now. That's true, but it's not going to help you here. It helps infinitely more to think of this as a wild, dangerous boar that has to be put in the cage. It's irredeemable. It's unfortunately, we can't cut out a lower brain. We have to live with it. But we can get it in a cage and take away its power. So get good and mad at how much the reptilian brain has taken from your life. I mean, this has been your worst enemy, right? This is for most people, it's really destroyed their lives in so many ways. Get good and mad at it and intimidate it. Make it be the inferior animal that it's designed to be. And then you can take control of your life again. And I'll say one more thing. Look, if you need a hug, I've got a hug for you, right? I'm a sweet guy. But I've got no compassion for our pigs. I've got no compassion for them.
I can totally see that. I really love it. I think it's great. There's a real sense of power that comes, from listening to you speak about it. You've sold hundreds of thousands of copies of your book.
Over a million.
Over a million. Wow. So that is amazing. You're doing, great work out there. Earlier on, you talked about, wanting to reach your potential in terms of helping people and contributing to the world. So I think you're doing a great job there. And I believe you train therapists or trained coaches?
We have a training program. We're closing it now because we don't want to create too much competition, and we're trying to focus on some, other deeper techniques and getting third-party clinical trials going, and we want to help 1 million people a year. Oh, by the way, when I say we have over 1 million readers, we have over 1 million readers. Not all of them have paid, because when you tell me it's time, I'll tell people how to get a free copy of the book. But I didn't want to mislead people.
Great. Okay, well, I know that you've got another appointment coming up. So if you would like to tell everybody where they can find you, how they can get a free copy of the book, anything else that...
Yeah, we have a lot of things to offer, but it all starts with a free copy of the book, which you can get at neverbingeagain.com. Click the big red button and you can sign up for the reader bonus list. When you do that, I'll give you 3 things. The free copy is in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format. We do have Audible and physical copies, but there's a charge for that. But electronic formats are free, Kindle, Nook, and PDF. You will get a free set of recorded coaching sessions. I recorded a bunch of full-length sessions because I know this sounds really abstract and harsh and weird, and you must be thinking, why in the world does Susan have a psychologist on who's got a pig inside of him? It just doesn't make sense. And it sounds cruel, but it's actually very compassionate and loving. And it takes people from feeling hopeless and powerless and confused about food to feeling powerful and optimistic and enthusiastic in just one session. I wanted you to hear that. So I recorded a bunch of sessions, all free. And we have a set of food plan starter templates. So the program itself is diet agnostic. I'm not concerned with teaching you the absolute best healthy nutritional way to eat. I'm concerned with helping you to stop overeating and stop binge eating. And so we work with people on any dietary philosophy. I myself am a plant-based person, but we work with ketogenic people and point counters, calorie counters, whatever your philosophy, you'll find this works for you as long as you're eating something that's nutritionally complete. You can't make rules that restrict your nutrition and calories too much, or it won't work. Just like I could not make a rule that says I will never pee again because my bladder is going to tell me in 6 to 12 hours that I have to do that. Click the big red button, get a whole bunch of bonuses, read the book. You'll get led to my podcast. You'll get led to the Facebook group. You'll get led to the other social media stuff, and we'll be happy to have you in our circles. Neverbingeagain.com. Click the big red button.
Great. And I will put all those links in the show notes so that people can easily track you down and find you. And yeah. I've found this last hour, I feel empowered and confident and
good.
And inspired. It's really, really lights something up inside of you, and I can see not only around my nutrition and my exercise and my healthcare, but many aspects of my life where I can take these concepts and then use them to help fulfill that potential that that we all have inside of ourselves.
Helps you install new behaviors and character traits.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's been really delightful talking to you. Thank you so much. I've got so many more questions and things, but
I'm happy to do it again if you want to.
That might be great at some stage, but I know you need to go. So thank you so much for your time and patience and getting here.
Thank you, Susan. It was a delight.